welcome to the Purpose Over Profit podcast with Darren and Chris, where each week we discuss what it takes to live a life of purpose and profit and explore the lives of people trying to achieve just that.
Welcome back to the Purpose Over Profit podcast, and as usual I'm joined by my co-host Darren. How are you, Darren?
Yeah, I'm really well. Different podcast recording time tonight, I guess, because we're joined by Josh from Over the Water. But yeah, really looking forward to this. I heard a lot of good stuff from Chris. So look forward to the next hour.
Fantastic. What I'll do is I'll introduce Josh first of all. But first of all, actually, Josh, how are you doing anyway? Over there, it's what is it, 10 a.m. over there just now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, early start to the day. Already got cranked some emails out and feeling good, productive. I think today might be a productive one.
Fantastic. Just to introduce Josh, Josh is the founder of a great company called Great Mondays. He's got a fantastic book out, which I've read twice now, actually, no, 3 times. I've listened to the audio twice as well, which is a bit creepy, Josh, because I've heard your voice twice now. So I feel like I know you really well. And you do some great work as well. You put out some fantastic content on LinkedIn, very topical content that gets the kind of engagement, people discussing it as well, which is fantastic. So it's great to have you on, Josh.
Oh, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for thinking of inviting me.
So Josh, it would be great for our listeners to kind of understand a bit of your background and really what drove you to starting a great organisation like Great Mondays.
Yeah. So I actually started as a brand strategist, and I had done a lot of work I trained as a graphic designer, and had done a lot of work in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, around helping organizations either create or improve their brand. And there was a few things that happened to sort of push me in this direction. One was I left the agency I was with, and there weren't really any jobs available because of the housing bust. And so I was like, oh no, shit, what do I do? So I had to kind of think about what I wanted to do, really. I didn't have to imprint on a job listing, right, where it's like the job title. So I was like, what is it that I want to do? And a lot of what I what I was feeling really compelled by was the work that we were doing with organizations on the inside. And that to me felt really, really important, because there are so many of these brands that are creating these brand promises, but then they don't have a plan to deliver on those brand promises. So that's where I started. And I started to think about, I could help some organizations actually using some of those brand tools to engage their employees in that story, the story that, as a brand guy, I would help them tell to hopefully customers. And what we really wanted to do was make sure that they were able to deliver on that. And not only that, but be clear with their employees, get them engaged. And it was almost like you had to sell as hard to employees or potential employees as you would to customers. And so eventually figured out that was culture. That was called culture. And that was what started. Now, I don't come to company culture from a traditional organizational development or HR background. I just saw this as an opportunity. I knew the work that some of the projects that I had worked on, and I was like, I just think no one's doing this. This is really important. And I just kind of threw myself in and started to learn all about company culture and thinking about all the ways that I might be able to help some of these companies help engage and elevate their employees, to not only help employees feel and sort of elevate themselves, become better contributors and feel compelled, but also that is going to that increased engagement is going to help that organization from at the bottom line.
Well, that's fantastic, Josh. No, that's fantastic, Josh, because I think that's brilliant, because when you think about most organizations, when you join an organization where a company sorts, they might have values already in place, but those values are placed upon you and people don't get the opportunity to become part of those values, and you automatically either become part of that culture or the culture isn't right for you as well. So really, was that driven through your own experience of working through these agencies as well, or understanding the culture and how that worked as well, that then drove you to establishing your own culture brand agency as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it was really just me at the beginning, and I and this is with any startup, right? Where it's like the founders are the culture. And so it was just kind of my own personality. And one of the things that I write about in my book, Great Mondays, is that you're essentially that culture is what the founders are until you grow up to a certain size. And then you can allow for that culture to kind of grow and evolve beyond you. And so that's, to me, is kind of how I think about it. And anybody that I bring on as either a contractor or an employee or a partner, I try to allow them to move. If I see something that I think is powerful, compelling, positive in the way that they act, I try to allow and amplify that to go forward. Now, we're a small organization under 20 people, and so it's not the big corporate experience, but the principles are the same, which is allowing your employees to kind of grow and stretch in that direction. And as far as we've been through a couple versions of our own values, and it's been an interesting kind of internal exercise to think about what our own values might be and how do we live those, and where do those where do you see them come to light, and how do you make decisions around those values? Because it's one thing to tell other people to do it, but it's another thing to do it yourself.
Yeah, I know we're going to probably get into it. I know there's kind of 6 components, I think, that I've seen from your book. I know Chris will probably know it off by heart with the amount of times he's listened to it and heard it. But what really kind of struck me there is listening to you talk is the decision that you made at quite a difficult economic time to not go and maybe take what could be an easy or safer route. You kind of took a step back and said, how would I best want to serve? And then you structured, right, okay, well, how does that fit into, a vocation, something that I can earn money from? So could you just share a little bit about, I guess, that decision to do that, any fear that you had potentially of kind of that startup at that time? And what do you think, I guess, made the difference? Because there'll be people, we might only be a couple of years away from something similar, maybe not on the same scale from an economic point of view. And there might be some people that you've taken something which is difficulty and created an opportunity there. But yeah, I'm just keen to understand just your mindset around that time.
All fear. It was all, it was so scary. Here's what I observed. So I wish I could say that I went in with all the confidence and had options, but I did not. I had sort of created, as a sort of essential, one of the key employees at this organization, I worked with my employer to kind of create an off ramp. So within 3 months, right? So it wasn't just 2 weeks, I'm out of here, but it was like, how am I going to do this? So I had some lead time to try to get some jobs. And that was my goal. And I had a couple offers. And then like literally the day I'm walking out the door, it was like, the economy, the entire stock market crashes, and all those offers were like, yeah, we're going to wait 6 months. And I was like, fuck, like I didn't have anything to fall back on. I wasn't like, oh, hey guys, you know how I said I was just going to leave for 6 months and I was done with this fucking place? Like, no, that was it. I was out the door. So I was like, who do I know and what can I sell them? I was not being picky. But at the same time, it afforded me that forcing function, afforded me the opportunity to really go, okay, it's no longer a job search. It's like a soul search. It's really about what I see for myself. So I no longer had the constraints of job titles. That's what you were referring to. And so, and it took, it was a lot of struggling through, like it took me about 6 months to kind of come to that first realization, that idea of Great Mondays as an organization, as the idea. So that was it. And there are a number of these stories about how many people that start companies during downturns, either because the options aren't good or there aren't options. So it was, for me, it was the only thing. I was just working my network. And by the way, I had this brilliant idea at the time, right? I thought, okay, great, this is exactly it. And so I went out back into the world and I said, hey, everybody, I'm not into brand anymore. I'm into culture. And everybody goes, huh? Like ballet? Like, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh shit. Like, I I was so convinced that that was it and everybody would really understand my kind of the vision for that. And I was like, did not do anything to solve the short-term problem. It was solving the long-term problem, but not the short-term problem.
And is that because of a lack of understanding and awareness of what culture was at that point? Because obviously you even the name of your company, Great Mondays, that's such a positive spin on something which is so down at the time as well.
It was, yes, absolutely. People did not understand that that was going to be important. They didn't, I mean, it's a strength and a weakness that I had this vision and I can sort of see that. I'm like, I see where the world's going, but then one of my favorite quotes is there's a big difference between a clear view and a short distance. And so I learned that really in a very hard way. So one, people didn't know what it meant. Two, it wasn't something that anybody was investing in. And so it was my job, because I believed in it. I had that moment, if we're going to connect with purpose for a second. It was like, when I had that realization, I was like, that's it. That's what I'm going to do to help people. I want people to be happier at work where they spend 80% of their waking hours. Like, that to me was just like, that was it. There was no turning back. It was, do it or do or die. And for me, I was just kind of charging forward. That nobody, they weren't there yet. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is going to be a bit. So I had to do the immediate work of like, sorry, I forget what I just said. Any brand strategy work you have, I'm happy to take because I needed that work immediately. But I continued to invest in the long term and thinking about where this was headed. And my belief was, over time, I would push the public consciousness in my own small way and hope that other people would move in that direction, so that less of the work over time would be brand and brand strategy work, and more of the work would be culture. It's taken a decade. It's taken a decade to get to that place. And we're still taking brand strategy work when it's appropriate. And so to me, that was the learning for if we're thinking about starting a business as an entrepreneur, it's like, what can how do you, what is the cash flow that you need today versus what's going to be your differentiator in the future?
I absolutely love that, Josh, because I'm even just thinking about, there's a quote from, I think it's James Cameron, who did Titanic, is that right?
That's right.
He did Titanic, and he had the idea for Avatar straight after it, but he decided to hold because he didn't think people were ready for it at that point, because the technology wasn't up to it. He had to wait something like 15 years for it to catch up. And he had to actually kind of create the technology to make it ready. So that's a visionary. So that's having time in the future to have that idea, but you've got to wait to play catch up. And it sounds like you had that as well. And you touched upon one of the first components, which would be great to go into, which was purpose. It'd be good to kind of go through those components slowly, if that's okay, just to help our listeners understand the components of what a cultural brand is.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the challenges at the beginning of this journey, which started over 10 years ago for me, was, what is it? What is culture, right? You have this sort of sense of like, I kind of know where I want to head and what it's going to be. But like, how do you define it? Like, how do we put words around it? And that was step one. And so there's a bunch of definitions out there, and I talk about it in the book, of like, and they're all good, right? My definition is the cause and effect of everything you do. So that's where I landed. Not the only definition, but good enough. But then I was left wanting. I was like, well, what do I do with that? I can go out and say that as much as I want, but what is a CEO going to do with that? Like, there's just a realization. You can see the problem, but you can't do anything about it. So that's when I went in and worked with some of my colleagues that were coming from that sort of design orientation, and interested in culture. And we worked through. We were like, okay, we have to define if we're going to have this be applied, that has to be defined very clearly. And that's where we came up with the 6 components and tested them with other folks that were, were like, is this right? So we had a bunch of people that helped us create this. And that happened before the idea of the book came. So now we're going, so essentially that was, I believed in this. It started working. I was like, now I need to get this message out. So that's why I wrote the book, Great Mondays, was to really help people, executives, managers, employees, and associates be able to find little toeholds and levers that they can actually start to move so that culture can become a business tool. So that's the preamble. So there's 6 components that create a system, a self-supporting system. Purpose, values, and behaviors. So those are the first 3. That's how we design or imagine the culture. Think about drawing the map. Purpose, values, and behaviors. The second 3 are actually going on the journey, operationalizing the culture. Recognition, rituals, and cues. Because just because you say this is what we want doesn't mean that it's going to happen. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about humans. Humans are very difficult and stubborn and not really willing to change their habits. So we have to endeavor in thinking about culture as an ongoing process that we have to continue to work on. You would never think about finance as sort of a short-term goal, and it's going to be our focus for the next year. And then, hey, everybody, we've defined what our P&L is, and we're good. So I'm going to go. We don't need to work on that anymore. So just how as ridiculous as that is the same thing to say, we're going to define our culture, and then it's going to be good to go. You're just doing the first part. You haven't done any of the second part. So you guys talk a lot about purpose. My definition is, I think I believe we're pretty aligned. Why you're doing what you're doing. So personal purpose versus corporate purpose.
Yep.
Is why you're doing what you're doing beyond making money. Why you're doing what you're doing beyond making money. So that's purpose. And that's your North Star. That's the flag planted on top of the mountain. That's where we're all headed. Now, that's only so good because, again, you're like, okay, everybody, see that over there? Go get it. It doesn't describe how we're going to do that. And what happens is if you don't have values which act as behavioral guardrails, people can go on the wrong path, endanger themselves, endanger their peers, endanger their company. So I think about values as the key guardrails that are going to say, this is how we're going to get to that purpose. These are how we're making these choices. Because along the way, you're going to be tempted to take a shortcut. Because along the way, you're going to be distracted by, little gains. But remember, we're going here. And so we're going to help you stay on track. The third piece, behaviors, is...
What I was going to do, Josh, actually, before you jump onto that, I love the values pieces. I mean, I love it all fantastic, but I love the part where you talk around the cultural all-stars as well. I love that part as well. You talk around people who embody the values of the organization already and bring them on board. And because you always find those people in an organization that have been there for so long, they love it, they live and breathe it, they're an advocate of the brand, they're the ambassador of the brand, they're doing more PR for the brand than anyone else is. And I love that concept to bring them in as well.
Yeah. So the idea of the all-star is those folks inside your organization that are already exemplifying the kind of culture that you want. That's who you want to work with and pick up on. So I'm a fan of elevating what's working, and that's the goal. Now, there's been an evolution in that idea since the book. And this past year, we had a chance to start. We are actually in the process of working with the Washington, D.C. library, public library system. And we presented this when we were doing, they asked us to come and do purpose and values for them, because that was one of the big gaps that they had. And a consultant come in and say, this is a problem. Nobody's aligned. So we said, okay, we're going to find your culture all-stars. And they're like, nope, not all-stars. Ambassadors. I was like, okay, all right. That's fair. They don't want to touch anybody off. And so I think, and so I was like, all right, we can use that for them. But I started to use it with others. And I think it's actually a really nice way to consider it, so that there's not a hierarchy. So you can go through and just go through the book and kind of scribble out all-star and put ambassador. I think that would be the update.
I think that's fantastic. Honestly, and I love how you structure it as well, and you guide people came on to that about how they can go through the exercises. But I love that point as well. And sorry, I interrupted your flow. You're going to talk around behaviors.
No, it's good. So I was just going to wrap it up and say the third piece of that is behaviors. So the reason why that's so important is because culture is all about choices. It's all about behaviors. That's what that is. So we want to make sure that the outcome of our definition is about, and the understanding about everybody who's engaged is that the goal isn't just to have words on the wall, but about behaviors. What are the ways that we're going to enact this brand? So that's really the center point. So here we go. We're setting up, that's where we want to go. Here's how we're going to get there. These are the behaviors that we aspire to. So now we're at the center point. It's almost like a hourglass, right? You kind of like go from really big and then behaviors.
Nice.
Okay. So now we're going to activate it and we're going to move it out. So the next one is recognition. So as humans, we respond very, very well to rewards and recognitions. And so, and organizations have done this for a long time. So what we want to do is reward values-driven behaviors. What we don't want to do, what most organizations do, is just reward random things. So it's the CEO award, or it's the, this quarter's innovation award, or whatever it is. And the problem is with that is if you keep changing it and it's not consistent and not consistently messaged, people don't know, like, you're just randomly awarding people things. Hey, CEO award, great job. It's probably going to be the top salesperson, because that's like the most obvious thing. The sales, I think it's interesting. Speaking of, I think sales is interesting. I think that it'll never not be rewarded, because that's just the way that kind of group and people operate. But the problem with that is you're rewarding the output and not the path. We want to reward how we're doing it, not what. Because if you reward what, again, you're going to get cheat. You're going to cheat, right? So here in the US, Wells Fargo, big bank, they got in all sorts of trouble because they were turning the screws on their bankers and saying, we need more sales. We need more economic activity. We need you to open up more accounts. And they're turning them so tight or incentivizing them so much that they started to cheat. Thousands of bankers are opening up fake or unauthorized accounts. I don't think these people are bad people. But when you're put in that situation, that your reward, that's what's going to happen. You're either going to get, it's like up your sales or you're going to be fired. Well, of course. So that to me is exactly the concept of why rewarding or incentivizing outputs is the wrong place to look. You want to reward and incentivize the behaviors, values-driven behaviors, consistently, so that you can say this person did this thing and it connects with this value, and everybody goes, "Ooh, I want that."
You have some good examples of that. What would be a couple of good examples that you can, without obviously breaking any confidentiality, but what are some good examples of that?
So we have a client that one of their values is acknowledge and own, because there was not a really good, consistent ownership of projects nor ownership of challenges. And what we're trying to say is okay and is encouraged is not only owning that project. I am responsible. But at the end of the day, when it doesn't go right, it is okay for me to say, hey guys, that was, I messed up, totally realized that. Here's how I'm going to fix it. As opposed to, I don't know who was in charge of that. So to me, that's like, if you're going to say, hey, look, Charlie headed up this big project, appreciate that he really took it on. And part of it, there was a mistake that happened and part of it didn't work. But I want to celebrate that not only did Charlie own it, but then corrected it and learned from it. And guess what? We all learned from that.
I think that's fantastic. I was going to say, I think that's fantastic when you think about the behaviours aspect, given the current climate we're in with the pandemic. And if it's a behaviour recognition tool, then it's so easy for organisations at the moment to look at staff and just cut their losses and actually downsize as much as possible to make sure they can last as long as possible within this current pandemic. But with CEOs coming on board, their bottom line is to increase market share or increase the stock price for their shareholders as well. So that will inevitably mean losing staff during a downturn as well. But if it's a behaviour recognition based upon values, then it's harder to do that as well, because it's an organisation that believes in what it's doing first off as well.
Yeah, we have a client currently, and the story was that during the pandemic last year, the CEO basically sent out a message and said, I know there's a lot going on. One of the things we're going to remove from your concerns, we're not going to lay off anybody through the pandemic. And they didn't. And they performed extraordinary. They're coming out of the pandemic performing better than they did before. And that was money in the culture bank. We just did a whole assessment and everybody's bringing that up. They're like, what was amazing is when the CEO came out and said that and did it.
Wow.
And that was like, can you imagine, right? Like, so you are, and everybody, this is a recent memory for everybody. Fuck, what's going to happen? What's our business going to do? Am I going to deal with my family? Am I going to lose am I going to lose my job? I'm not in the office. I don't know if people know what I'm doing anymore. What does my manager think? No one's getting laid off. Great. Now I can focus on doing my work. Were they going to, was there, downturn in sales and sales activity? Yeah. But their fundamentals were solid, and they knew coming out of this, they were going to do that. So the CEO saw the long-term play and has built that trust with the board and with the stakeholders and shareholders. Said, that's what we're going to do. So that's my, when you said that, I was thinking, yeah, exactly. Like that's what you want to do. So the last two components are rituals and cues. So one of the biggest challenges that I was asked about early on when I started talking about this, and then people started listening, was how do you scale culture? And I didn't have an answer for that because it seems like when an organization grows, the culture gets all messed up. And so I started to think about that and did a bit of research. And it turns out the problem is that the relationships start to degrade. And that when you have more people, the amount of people that you can know really deeply decreases. And so relationships, the way I define relationships in this context are the synapses of culture, because culture is about behaviors, and behaviors are contagious. If someone's successful, right? You're looking up at what does the C staff wear, right? Like just something as simple as that. So that is part of what we need to consider in every size organization. And so rituals are the ways that we build and strengthen those relationships. And I now no longer have to yell as loud about relationships because during the pandemic, everybody had to go home and all of a sudden you didn't have relationships anymore. Because at the office, relationships just sort of happened. We took them for granted. The water cooler, the proverbial water cooler, or whatever it is. And yeah, there was some, I didn't feel as close to the people in the other office in the other country, but it was good enough. It was working. Now it's just like everybody's apart and it's just like done, right? Like it's just like there's no more relationships. You're like, you just get on the call. You're like, yeah, what the fuck's going on? Like, all right, let's get into it.
I'm
There's
so glad.
no,
I'm so glad you touched upon that. I was going to ask you about that, about how you think culture's changed since the pandemic's happened, or do you think
yeah.
it needs strengthening?
Oh, if the rituals changed even,
Yeah.
it's like you say, like everyone's remote, like no one's in the same room. It did, like, my experience was exactly how you've described it. Like, I actually took redundancy last year. Like, I happily took redundancy, and I'm sure there was a lot of people that it wasn't a great situation for, but I willingly took it. But yeah, as soon as that happened, it was like where is everyone? People just went AWOL. But also we knew we were going through a restructure. So to come back to that earlier point, it was like that's where everyone's energy and focus was. Productivity was down the tubes. Culture, connection, all of that was down the tubes as well.
So I was thinking about this, right? Where it was like at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody's like, yeah, work from home. Right? And they're like, I'm going to be so productive. I don't have to commute, work-life balance. And all that's true. And it's really good for individual tasks, high focus tasks. People got so much email written last year. Oh my God. Emails are off the charts. But guess what? That's not the entirety of business. So what we're going to see is you're going to see the echoes of this for companies that don't understand what's happening. The team, the collaboration, the ability for people to work together is like those projects, that innovation and experimentation and, just even doing anything together. You just don't have that relationship to build on anymore. So that is really part of what should be informing business leaders' consideration about how to move forward in a hybrid work world.
And I love how, like, point 6 we're going to come on to, it talks about staying connected for the future. And I love that kind of summary, and it's ever so poignant just now, given the current pandemic and what we're all facing just now, and how people are starting to come together more and be allowed, if you like, to come out, and especially in the UK, to go out for drinks and have food together and hug one another, all this kind of stuff, which you took for granted before. But even your colleagues, like you were saying, that used to go out for a beer after work, socialise, when that's been completely stripped away. Yeah. So then you're just trying to build that culture again, if you like. Yeah.
Now, I'm not advocating at all for everybody has to come back to the office. And I believe, and it just happens to be that physical presence was the way that we were operating and building relationships. Yep. It does not have to be that way. And so my argument is we need to double down on rituals, on the things that bring us together. And they need to be different than what they were in person. And I don't know if you've seen me, I've sort of harped on this on social media and some of my pieces of like, don't invite me to another fucking virtual happy hour. I'm not interested. I'm just not interested. It's not the same thing. You can't just do that and you're like, hey, everybody, here's the water cooler. Come show up. It's like, this is a whole new way of working. How do you build relationships asynchronously? That's a massive question. That is that's so interesting. How do you start to do that? What are some of the tools that you're going to use to do that? How do you get to know people in a way that doesn't that doesn't extract energy, right? Like where it's like, it's not another fucking Zoom call. There's other ways to do it, people.
And it doesn't piss people off as well. That's a key thing as well, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What are some ways that people could look at beyond, like you say, those normal Zoom calls? Come on, we'll have a kind of team meeting with no agenda, just for a chat. As like that's the only way. Because that was my experience. That was kind of what my manager and what I seen around the organization. That's what I saw.
I think there's a sort of discrete opportunities and sort of built-in opportunities. So one of the examples that I wrote about recently was when a team leader said, everybody wear your favorite concert t-shirt to the next meeting, or your favorite t-shirt or whatever. And then essentially they spent the first half of the meeting just kind of telling everybody about their favorite, Belle Biv DeVoe or whatever it is, which is one of the T-shirts that one of my colleagues wears. She has all of her 90s T-shirts out now.
Awesome.
And it's amazing. And I'm like, no way, MC Hammer, that's incredible. You went to that concert, right? Like, so there's that human, like, how do you become human? How do you move beyond the workplace? And then there's also, I would say, discreet. So you just said, let's just hop on for a chat. I don't know. I mean, like, just to catch up, I think maybe there's other opportunities where it's, are we going to do something together? Like what, maybe there's some way of contributing, giving back to the community that we can work on together. What is an external project that you're going to get some time to work on together? So you're doing things otherwise, or maybe it's just the hashtag pets channel on Slack, right? That's a perfectly great way to do that. People are just, they're like, I love my pet. I don't know if you guys have pets or anything. You look like a gerbil guy, Chris. Is that?
I've got a dog, but you do have a gerbil, man.
my kids have gerbils. Well done, Josh. Yeah. My kids have Darth Vader and Summer gerbils.
Oh, so, nice. Darren, what did you say? You have a pet?
I've got a lab. So I've got a golden lab called Mila.
All right, Mila. Well, we've got Luna, who's a half shepherd, half lab mix, and she's quite a character in our household. And so all of a sudden, right, like here we are, like you're like, I'm just opening up, you're like, I just love my pet, and I'm just being, I'm softening up a bit, and we get to have a little bit of a relationship. So to me, it's like, how do you work to? I mean, it's really about ultimately relationships. Building a head on relationships is about getting to know other people and knowing where are they coming from, like, so that you can build that trust that allows you to come to them when you're in a panic, or allows you to understand what's happening, right? So one of my colleagues, they were in a long-term relationship, they just broke up. Fuck, right? I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I totally get that. And now I understand, and I appreciated her for sharing that, because now I knew, and she did this on purpose, because the next week she said was going to be messy. And if she didn't trust me to share that information, I'm going to be like, what the fuck's wrong with her? How come she's not getting back to me? I would never say that to her now. Right? I give her a little more grace. I give her a little more, right? So there's just other parts of ourselves that we aren't used to explicitly sharing. Implicitly at the water cooler, hey, Joe, how was the weekend? Hey, Preetha, like, what was how's your kids? So it's just that humanity that we need to bring up. And that's going to be, I think, one of the big challenges with our new work world, whether we're going back, hybrid or not at all. So you got to think about that. I'll plug my... I've got some friends that run a cool little startup called Donut, and Donut is a cool little plugin that works for Slack and I think some other platforms that just it kind of facilitates conversations. Hey, you don't know Chris, Josh and Chris, why don't you set up some time to talk? And then they've got all these little Donut starts to do other things to create these relationships. And as soon as I heard about that, like, I was like, oh, I love it. It's the best thing ever. It's so cool. It's exactly what we need. And they were doing okay. But the pandemic is just like, boom, like,
wow.
I think that's a great sign. Like, they are taking off. They've got so much stuff going on now. So in any case,
definitely checking that out. That sounds, because obviously the network kind of idea, people do networking, and the networking's got a kind of bad vibe about it. I mean, it's getting better now with the onlineness, but when people basically just shove their stuff in the chat to say, this is who I am, come talk to me, it just turns you off straight away. But it's the worst thing in the world. But then that kind of, does that take us like to around to point 6, which was cues? We kind of spoke about that. Is that a cue which we're saying there?
Cues, right? So cues are all the ways in which we can remind people about what we're trying to do at the highest level, or at higher levels than we operate relative. So the kind of all the stuff that we were just talking about, it's like, it is the business of business. I got to do emails. I got to do quarterly reports. I got to do budgets. And I'll forget, it's like, it's just hard. It's hard working. It is. And so how do we keep people elevated? I think in the book I talk about buoyancy or something, where it's like you're trying to remind people that they're part of a bigger purpose. Here are the values, and even in ways that are just quarterly behavioral goals. How do you start to bring people, tell a story? I find the most compelling cues are ones that not only tell a story, but there's a bigger concept, there's a bigger story in it. Where one of my clients, the part of their lore or part of how they imagine themselves as sort of stewards of a client journey, and each of the projects are like mountains, and they're like essentially, I can't do the work for you, but I can tell you, I can cut the brush, and I can tell you where the poison ivy is, and I can even bring some of the tools that we need, but you have to come with me. So that's part of how they describe it. And then the conference rooms are each named for a different high peak, a different mountain across the world. And to me, it's like, ooh, like it's so good, right? My brain starts to sparkle because it's not obvious. It's not like the name of a client or like, our history or whatever, our founder name, which is also great, right? But it's like someone comes in and is like, why is this conference room Kilimanjaro? Wait a minute, why are all these conference room peak? Like, it's not so obvious. Let me tell you. You don't know? Let me tell you why. Here's this opportunity, and boom, we're into, now we're off and running. So to me, so cues are anything, and it could be physical, it could be digital, it could be behavioral, anything that's going to bring people up and remind them where we're headed. Employee of the month, customer of the month, right? Or it could be the purpose statement on the wall, or it could be the values on your key card, right? So there's no end to the kind of creativity that you're going to see. We had a client that once we launched the values, their IT team designed wallpaper for all the conference rooms, digital wallpaper. So when you came in, it had one of the values up on the screen, right? Great, perfect. Just a reminder, like that's great. That's another thing that you can do, and so it's like the limit is your creativity as far as that's concerned. And that brings us, the reason why I said it was a system, because that brings us right back up to the top: purpose and values and behaviors. So that's going to reinforce that, and we're going to create this upward spiral of amazing culture, and always working to make it better, right? Always contributing, always evolving, always changing, always learning.
Yeah, and I love that. I love the fact that it's a system. I love how you talk about it like it's a spiral where it's it has to continually evolve, because we evolve, right? The world evolves, everything's always changing, right? So if we think that we can just chuck a mission statement on the wall and think that that's us done, and everyone knows where we're going.
All the values, you just give them, here's our 5 values.
Yeah.
Collaboration, innovation, equality, and
integrity and honesty.
Integrity, exactly.
Oh, God.
It's not, no one's going to say, oh, no, non-integrity. That's not a strategic choice, right? Like that's just, you're like, no, I'm not going to collaborate. No, I'm not going to be. That's not it. You got to start to really dig in. So that's a quick rant on values unto themselves. But yes, you can't just put values up in the handbook and say, these are our values, go.
I even like it down at a micro level. If I think about, we had a linguist on Eloise, fantastic chat a couple of days ago. We recorded it, and we were just talking about labels. How people like it's equivalent. I keep using this analogy, but it's the asking people what they do is the human equivalent of the dog bum sniff. Like that's how we guess who people are and how we're kind of stated with class and whatnot. So it's like, what do you do? I'm an accountant, right? Okay. Like, so, but who are you? Like, what is it you do? What service do you provide? How do you bring value to the world? What gets you going? Like, that's all the stuff. Yeah. That's all the stuff in the organization. I think I hear, even if you're an individual in a company, like even if all of that stuff is not there, I think you would perform better by looking at your 6 steps there to say, well, how are you playing a cog within that role? There might be a lot of things that's out with your control, but actually you'll be more effective, and it may actually trigger you to go and do what you've done. Like you've created your own business. That might be your story, or it might be to go and get a different job or work in a different industry. So I even think at a micro level, there's so much there. Yes, organizations, it would be fantastic, obviously, and I know that's who you work with, but even at an individual level there's so much to take out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Josh, what I was going to do is try and wrap this up, because there's so much good content in this one discussion. I was going to say, like, a couple of things is how can people know whether or not they've got a poor culture? I mean, it's probably obvious to people just now, or organizations just now during the pandemic, but is there a tool they can use, and how can people find you, and how can people find your book and your company?
Yeah, so I think nobody's got a perfect culture. I have a client right now that the culture is actually pretty good. And so the framing is moving from like notable to exceptional. Wow. And so there's always work to do, right? So the answer is like, what is a good culture? What is a bad culture? I mean, it just depends on what you're trying to achieve. So what you need to define is what you're like, what is it? What are you trying to do? And then you can go, oh, right. You're like, are you in the right location? Are you in the right latitude and longitude? What do you mean? Like, what, and where am I where should I be? Should I be somewhere else? I need to define that first. And then you can start to think about it. And the truth is, the way that we go about it is because the companies will hire us to get to that endpoint, but then we can't, if I'm telling you we have to have the endpoint before we can tell you how you're doing, like that doesn't work as far as a business is concerned, right? So what we do is we just try to find out what we don't know, and we start with just a bunch of qualitative interviews internally, right? We're just going to talk to people that, all the executives, but not just the executives. We got to get to the ambassadors too, and we got to get to other folks. And those ambassadors, they know exactly what's happening. I mean, they are sharp, and they're going to say, here's where we're doing well, here's where we're not doing well. And sure, you could do a big quant study and ask all these questions, but for me, that's not as useful, because are you asking the right questions? I mean, you're getting data, but is it the right data? And two, it's just not as interesting. Like, I just don't find it, like, I just don't get it as much. Now, you need
to have a conversation, don't you, to really
a conversation, because you don't know what you're asking about yet. Yeah. So that's how I start, and that's what I would recommend for folks. So definitely, my job is to help as many people understand that culture is a business tool that needs to be wielded as much as your IT department, your CTO, your CHRO, all those other pieces. And the book is a great place to start. I've got a lot of resources at greatmondays.com. I've got all this, all the exercises in the book you can download for free on the website. You can find out more about me. You can find all my writing, all the stuff that I'm thinking about. You can order the book on Amazon, and the audiobook will be back up on Amazon shortly. It was taken down because of some dispute between my publisher and Amazon, but I think it's coming back. So audiobook's there. If you like the sound of my voice, you're not tired of it yet, you can get the audiobook, the digital book. And it's all it's written in very clear, short prose. It's very easy to go through with actionable exercises. And find me on LinkedIn, Josh Levine, Great Mondays. I have a little lightning bolt next to my name. You can absolutely find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with you. That's my primary social media outlet. So I'll do that. You can sign up for my newsletter called 1 Minute Mondays. So I send that out sparsely, but it happens. And so I try to get my, all my pieces out there. And you can find me, Josh at greatmondays.com. Send me an email. I'm easily findable. So I'm happy to chat up anybody if you got questions about the book or culture or, I don't know, anything else.
And Josh, what do you think about purpose over profit? Obviously, that's what the podcast is about.
My long-term, even before I think I started Great Mondays, my Twitter tag was profit follows purpose.
Oh, nice.
And that to me is kind of the encapsulation of what we're trying to do. If you're talking about building long-term value, that's the idea. So it's not one or the other, but the relationship between the two and the order in which it comes.
Awesome.
That's a fantastic answer, but it puts us in a bit of a bad situation. Do we need to rename this podcast now? Because that sounds amazing,
that's
right?
So funny. It's exactly. I was like, I have a gentle suggestion. I think you need to change one word and then launch your podcast.
But this is part of the discussion. We're looking to get somebody on from crypto as well and talk about all this as well, understand money, and we've had people on that are philanthropists as well, and they talk about money gives you the opportunity to live your values and live your life as well. So yeah,
and to a certain extent, if I take you back to earlier in the podcast as well, you were talking, look, at the time you were like, any brand strategy work, I will take it. In the meantime, you're working part-time on this vision, trying to get your foot in the door and convince people. But yeah, there was a bit of putting food on the table and paying the bills, getting a roof over your head, that type of stuff. And
exactly.
that's why I get it's interesting. The work even on values, it's like, yeah, values are good. People will do the right thing. But then when it conflicts with like the family or paying the bills and stuff, this is where stuff goes wrong. This is where culture goes wrong. So, but it's great to get your take on it, Josh.
Awesome, Josh. That was honestly fantastic. Great sign off. That was a master at work there, signing that off there. So thank you very much for your time today, and enjoy the weekend when it does come.
I appreciate it. Thanks,
it's been great to meet you, Josh. And I'm sure listeners got loads of great content there.
All right, maybe we need to do a part 2 at some point.
100%.
Yeah, for sure. And I already said when Chris first introduced me to you, or introduced me to your work, I was like, oh yes, he's like, this is where he works, and I'm like, oh man, I love where that is. I follow the Warriors. I know they never got to the playoffs, but I'm like, oh, what a fantastic place to be, man. So we need to get some podcasts, obviously some business expense paid flights out there at some point when we're monetizing this, and then go and catch a game with you.
Exactly, need to get some sponsors.
all in good time, right?
All right, thanks everybody.
Yeah, cheers, Josh.
As always, thank you so much for listening to the Pop Pod this week. If you'd like to leave a review or share the podcast with others, then that'd be awesome. You'll find us on Instagram at the Pop Pod, and on Facebook we have a community group called Purpose to Progress that anyone can join. And we'll be back every Monday with a new episode, but until then, stay on purpose and we'll see you next week.